All right, next up, we have a very, very exciting panel for you. And this panel includes some really exciting people. We have Josh Constine from Techcrunch, Jacob Mullins, don't come up on the stage yet. I'm testing you, making sure you're awake. Jacob Mullins, the founder of Exit Round, Danielle Morrill, the CEO and co-founder of Mattermark, and Xochi Birch, the founder of Bebo and many other companies. Before that, I'd like to introduce to you a really fun individual. His name is Josh, who actually is going to be moderating and curating this panel. I don't need to really introduce him because everybody knows who Josh is. He writes for Techcrunch, and he focuses on, obviously, tech and everything else that's going on in this industry. But one thing you don't know is that Josh got a parking ticket on Tuesday. I know, isn't that terrible? He actually tweeted about it. That's why we know. So he loves to explore. He lives in the mission and has been quoted by the Wall Street Journal, CNN Money, The Atlantic, BBC Worldwide Magazine, The Slate, and so much more. I mean, when you're Josh, you're always getting quoted. So it's all good. Bring Josh to the stage. Along with Josh, we're going to bring Jacob, Danielle, and Xochi. Welcome. Oh, it's like all my friends. I love this.
Whoa. Awesome. Hi, everybody. Thank you guys for coming out for this today. I think this is going to be a really exciting panel because it's a really exciting time in San Francisco and the Silicon Valley right now. So quickly, I'm going to let these panelists introduce themselves to get a feel for what they do and what they're going to bring to the panel.
Hey, everyone. I'm Danielle with Mattermark, CEO and co-founder. So we build tools to help investors evaluate companies, track them, source deals, and figure out who's growing and who's not.
Perfect, and I am Jacob Mullins, and Exit Round is a marketplace for buyers and sellers of companies. We have about 1,100 buyers that span from other small companies to Fortune 500 companies that come on there to look for technology companies to acquire.
Hello, my name is Xochi Birch. I'll try to be really quick here. I started my career as a computer programmer in 1994. I started internet consumer-faced businesses in 1999, but I was in London at the time, and I moved to San Francisco in 2001 after the bubble. During that time, my husband and I created a number of startups, a lot of failures, a couple of successes. The one that you're probably most familiar with is Bebo. We sold Bebo to AOL in 2008, right before the financial crisis.
Awesome. And so a little more on my background. Before I started working for Techcrunch about 2.5 years ago. Before that, I was writing for Inside Facebook, and long before that, I was at Stanford, where I designed a master's degree in what's called cyber sociology, which is looking at how humans interact over the internet, anonymity, privacy, meme popularity cycles, and how new businesses are changing the way that we live. And things really did change in 2013. Venture investments were up 7%. The total amount invested was $29.4 billion, which is the highest amount since 2001, with $7.1 billion going straight to the internet industry. It's been crazy how many people are getting into the investment scene. There's been an explosion in seed investing, and that's also causing ripples in the rest of the funnel in terms of how companies grow. And so Danielle, maybe you could tell us a little bit about what's going on. Like, what's the landscape for fundraising right now? You know, where are most of the deals happening? Where is the bottleneck?
Great. So definitely you've probably read about some of this in the media before the Series A crunch, but there's this bigger picture before that even happens. There's more companies getting seed funding than ever before. And one of the interesting things about these rounds is they're $2 or $3 million of seed funding. These are pretty much what would have been a Series A in the past. So then you see this crunch. What it is the funnel narrowing so significantly at the A and the B because those rounds are pretty much same size, same amount of money going into them, even though the top of the funnel is so much wider.
So it seems like everyone wants to be an investor, but doesn't have enough money to do large rounds. So.
Or everyone wants to be a startup. Both, I guess both. And then on the late stage, you also have these very high valuations, maybe because the companies are not really incentivized to go public, or maybe for other reasons.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the late stage valuations. Like, why do we think that companies are able to raise at such a huge amount? I mean, we've recently had Uber and Pinterest and a bunch of companies just raise at crazy, not crazy, but really high valuations. Some of them are making a lot of money. Some of them aren't making any money yet. Like, why are these companies raising so much money in the late stage?
Well, these guys, we were talking about this actually in the green room, kind of this winner-take-all mentality. So maybe you guys want to comment on whole-
Sure. So my thought, so previous to this, or to X Around, I was at Shasta Ventures looking at kind of seed and Series A stage investing. And, we didn't see it as a Series A crunch per se. We saw it just an expansion on the number of seed companies that were coming in with a relatively stable amount of number of deals and dollars going into Series A fundraising. So that does cause kind of a choke point. And so, because there are many more startups coming through getting funded, that also means that there's a lot more to look at and potentially that are going to fail. And so my own perception on why there's these huge rounds is that venture capitalists are looking at the companies that have traction, that have revenue, and want to just back up the trucks into those because it's becoming increasingly difficult to find other more meaningful investments kind of within the larger Series A investment area.
Does that kind of mean that there's that basically people are building these new brands that they think are going to be around for a long time? Like, let's take Uber, for instance. That's a company that could foreseeably be around for a while. And so are investors trying to get in and really pouring money into this no matter the valuation because they just view that right now is sort of this crucial linchpin moment in terms of making new brands for the post-internet era?
I don't know if it's right now. I mean, certainly, there's the Andreessen mentality that there's a handful of winners every year, and it doesn't matter how much it costs to get into them. They need to be in every single one. But they have the bank account and the fund to be able to back that up. It's a very different perspective if you're an angel investor and you don't have a valuation kind of discipline and you're going and investing at very high valuations. You don't really know where that's going to end up. So I don't know if it's a brand perspective and more of just amount of dollars in the market.
I feel like I have to interject. So all these funds got raised right before the market crashed, 2007. I feel like there's a lot of new first-time funds and that they're bidding up these deals because they're like, well, we might not raise another fund. The market doesn't necessarily look that great right now. So I think they make it competitive too. It's just so many VCs. There's only so many companies. So it's a bidding war.
I've actually heard some horror stories from angel investors who they love investing alongside Andreessen because they know that Andreessen gives great help to the companies, but they hate what it does to the valuations because they'll be looking at like a specific valuation and they only have so much money that they can invest, and Andreessen will come in and be like, we'll invest $500,000 at whatever valuation, and just sort of ruin it for the rest of everyone and sort of inflate the egos of some of these startups. And maybe it's warranted because that strategy works for them, but that it makes it really hard for other investors.
Sorry, can I bring up another point? Is that during this time, at the moment, you really need less money to prove a concept and show traction. So I think that's another issue, is that there's a lot more companies being funded at the lower end, but they're not actually graduating to the next level. So there's fewer companies to invest the larger amounts of money and higher valuations.
Yeah, it's amazing what things like Parse, which was bought by Facebook, it's a mobile backend as a service, what that's done to valuations and raising money, because now you can basically have everything other than the front side of your app handled by Parse, and they do it all basically automatically, and you just pay a fee for that. And previously you'd have to really build infrastructure that could scale and learn your way through all of these big problems, and now they handle all of that for you, so it doesn't cost nearly as much to get something off the ground. But then again, we're seeing that traction is, the concept of traction is a lot different than it was a few years ago. It used to be like, oh, I have 1 million users. It's like, well, now you need 10 million users, and soon people think you're going to need 100 million users.
And you have to be active and doing things and actually using your app.
That's right, Twitter. You can't just have lots of unregistered users. So what do you guys think is the reason for people, why are people raising so much money though specifically right now? Like I heard that from people close to Dropbox and the Dropbox recent raise, which was 250 to 350 million, and they said that Dropbox really felt like the getting was good right now, and nobody wanted to get left out in the cold. That basically like it's springtime for fundraising. Like it's easy to get money, but they're worried that if the market changes suddenly come like 2 years from now, if it's a lot harder to raise money, no one wants to get stuck. Have you guys been hearing this as well? And like for that, would you recommend that companies who are going to need money in the near future raise right now?
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, we've raised a little bit of seed money. And so from my own fundraising perspective, it seems like the times are definitely good. And you can track trends throughout the valley and throughout the economy of when it's good. So yeah, money's cheap right now. The way investors, at least in private companies, base a lot of investment decisions is based on comparables. And the comparables we're seeing these days are nuts. I mean, you're looking at, Uber, although a lot of these companies have revenue, so I'm not discounting that, but, very large companies, Uber, Pinterest, Evernote, Square, Dropbox, et cetera, who've raised very large rounds, and they're taking very little dilution for it. So they may be diluting 10% or less and raising $200 or $300 million. Why wouldn't you do that? Like, it's actually a pretty prudent reason to cash up or fill up the gas tank. So from my perspective, yeah, I mean, now would be a great time to do it. But you need to have, commensurate, traction and revenue and ability to actually do it.
That's a cool that's a good insight though, right? That money is cheap and now is the time for fundraising.
I mean, money is cheap in the entire economy. Part of what we're seeing with the stock market being so high right now has to do with a monetary policy we've put in place the past few years stimulating the economy. So it's kind of interesting to see when the stock market is up, everybody's really excited to put money into pretty much everything, and people don't know how long it will last. So, I mean, the real bubble, this panel's about a bubble, it's not necessarily us, right? It's the whole economy is hot right now. So a lot of people are probably thinking, what if I miss that IPO window? What if that just closes? At least I'll have enough money to operate until survive nuclear winter until the next.
Yeah, that seems like it makes
around.
sense. For Pinterest, who are not making money right now, probably would need to be showing significant revenue generation to be able to IPO successfully, and so it makes sense for them to raise a ton of money. That way, no matter what happens over the next few years, they'll be okay.
Yeah, if Pinterest files for an IPO, I will say there's a bubble. Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure they have some tricks up their sleeve, but a lot of people have talked about it being a bubble in the pre-dot-com or the dot-com era because these companies weren't really doing anything. They were just spending a lot on marketing and therefore inflating their user numbers. Do you guys see that same problem now, or do you think that the companies with high valuations actually deserve them right now?
As far as I can tell, the companies that have stockpiled a large amount of cash, pretty much they're sitting on it. They're not marketing in the way they did in 1999. I don't think it's a bubble. I think it's definitely frothy, as you'd explain it. I think there's a lot of things going on at the moment, but it's nothing like it was in 1999. There's real value being created within these tech companies.
Yeah, I mean, valuations certainly have skyrocketed recently, but I think that lends to the competition in the market for actual investors. So things like AngelList and other crowdfunding platforms, along with the relaxing of the Jobs Act and general solicitation and enabling smaller investors to actually invest in small companies, has just created, everyone's an angel investor all of a sudden. And so before, investors were competing with each other across Sand Hill Road, and now investors are competing with each other around the world. And so that, if you're an aggressive investor and really trying to put a lot of capital to work, oftentimes you're willing to pay to win the deal. You're willing to pay that premium on the valuation, and doing so, it kind of just continues to bump it up. So I'd say I don't think there's a bubble. I think there's an overinflation in the valuations that companies are getting today, which is a cool thing when you raise your first round. But when you go to raise your second round, it can hamstring you very, very easily, because all of a sudden your company either needs to substantiate that previous valuation in order to get a higher valuation on the next fundraise, or you're considering a markdown to your last round, which signals, that's just horrible signaling. So it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah, I think when you're raising money, you really need to be thinking about, is this the right amount of cash that will get me to the next milestone where I can prove to investors that I'm worth significantly more? Otherwise, if you run short before you get the product out, or you get to those 10 million users, or you beat one of your significant competitors, if you can't get to that point and you need to raise a bridge in between, that's when you're really facing stuff like a down round. And so it's cool to stay lean, and conversely, it's also cool to have plenty of money in the bank, but hitting that sweet spot, I think, is really critical.
Yeah, and dollars raised kind of plays into that as well. So for example, some people say that if you raise between 750 and 1.5 million within that range, you're kind of stuck, because you're raising either too much to be able to bump up the valuation on the next round, or too little to be able to actually prove your concept. Whereas, as a seed stage trying to prove out an idea, potentially go out and raise 500K, be able to prove out an idea, you have a small valuation, but then you can go out and raise maybe $2 million or $2.5 million actually after you have some proof, and be able to kind of stair step it that way, as opposed to kind of getting like you said, kind of stuck in the middle.
It's also super important to know where your growth is coming from. I've seen too many horror stories of companies raising big Series B or even Series C rounds, when really all their traffic was built on a Facebook viral mechanic. Two sort of horror stories I point to a lot are Bandpage, which I think they raised $15 million, but then Facebook changed the way that the profile works. Suddenly you couldn't be the default landing page on a musician's Facebook page, and their traffic just fell. They lost 90% of their traffic in 3 months, and suddenly they're stuck with all this money. There's no way they could raise at a higher valuation after that. And Branch Out kind of had the same problem. So make sure that if you are raising based on your growth numbers, that that it's coming from a place that's sustainable and long term. The one thing I'm really excited about the additional competitiveness in fundraising right now is it's forcing venture capitalists to really show what their value add is. And like, that's awesome. Personally, I think like the era of dumb money is over and it couldn't come to a close soon enough. If there's plenty of investors out there, like you want to be able to find ones that are actually going to help you, not just hand you a check. Have you guys, like right now we're seeing a big expansion in like very dedicated specific funds that do something really well. Like, I think Google Ventures is really well known for design, and Greylock is great for operating, and Coastal Ventures is great for like being a fixer. Like if you're missing something like a CTO or you need to do specific recruiting, they're really good at those things. And how are you seeing, more, sort of second tier funds handling that need to be showing real value?
Well, I mean, I'm just going to be difficult.
Please
I
be
think
difficult.
I think a lot of it is just BS PR to make them more competitive to win the deal. Whether or not those things add value is probably very case by case, because it has a lot more to do with individual relationship between that partner and that company. But what I think maybe you are seeing is more and more individuals marketing themselves and what they have to offer, rather than, so Andreessen has this agency model, and I think that that's very compelling to a lot of founders. They're like, we don't know how to do recruiting, we don't know how to do PR. But I think another thing people are looking for is this specific person going to help me? What have they done? And so you see all these VC bloggers now kind of creating their own individual brands. I almost feel like that's the bigger wave than, and maybe that's what the mid-tier folks are doing, is they're saying it's not about the whole fund's PR, it's about individual differentiation, partner by partner.
Yeah, I recommend really strongly, if you're like an angel investor or even just working at a fund, the way that you distinguish yourself is figure out what your expertise is and blog relentlessly about that and make it known that that's what you're good at. So if there's a company out there that says, hey, that's the one missing piece that I don't know how to do, they're going to come to you. So let's talk a little bit about M&A right now. I mean, you said that there's been a huge explosion, Danielle, in M&A this year.
Yeah, I think the stat area was already up on pace to be up 55% over last year, and still growing, so pretty exciting.
Any insights into why you think that's happening?
Very exciting. Yeah, this is core in our market right now. So I think there's a couple of reasons. There's 3 reasons why companies acquire in general. The first is for market share. The second is for product. And the third is for talent. And I remember I used to be at Microsoft, and there was an all hands with Steve Ballmer, and someone asked him a question about acquisitions, saying Microsoft wasn't very acquisitive, and he gave the example that we really, if we buy something over $1 billion, it's for owning a market. We're buying a market. If we buy something for under $1 billion, it's for a product or IP. They rarely do talent acquisitions. And so thinking about those 3 things that you're going to buy for, product, talent, or market share, and you look at companies like in tech. Companies in tech are definitely having a talent stretch right now, and so they're buying both for market and product, but the talent piece is really a big part that's making them incredibly active today. And then companies outside of tech now are realizing that they need to have software inside their businesses. So we work with a lot of buyers who are large insurance companies, large hotel companies, large malls and retail stores. And they realize that while their core business is not software, they need to have great software in order to reach their end customer. And so, rarely does anyone actually want to go work at one of these large insurance companies that's a great technologist. And so the way they combat that is by actually purchasing companies. So we've just seen a huge influx of people, companies across the board looking to buy.
As far as I understand it, it seems like the writing is on the wall that like if you're a big company and you don't keep you're inherently going to endure brain drain. People want to work at small companies where they have a lot of direction, where they see very vividly the output of their work, opposed to working at these giant companies where it can, sure, there's huge impact to be had, but a lot of times your effort gets lost in the bureaucracy of it all. And I think that that's inherently leading great people to leave big companies. And so if you don't fix that, I think the companies are seeing the writing on the wall that if you don't do something about that, you're basically going to stagnate. You're going to lose your best talent. You're not going to see the next big trend coming. You're not going to be prepared, and you could slowly wither away the way that like my parent company AOL has. They've tried to make some big acquisitions. They bought Techcrunch, which I think was a really smart idea because we were doing very well. And they bought some other good properties, but they're still a dial-up business, and they're losing a lot of talent because of that. But now we're seeing companies like Google and Facebook who are just like, we don't want to be that. We don't want that the same thing to happen to us. We're going to buy whoever we can, because sitting on the money doesn't do us any good if we miss the next big market. It's like, if you buy a company that costs $100 million, but it's going to make you $2 billion in the future because you didn't miss that market, it might seem expensive at the time. But Okay, so what?
So just going back to that point, AOL does have a history of making wrong buys. Bebo
Tell us a
being
little bit
one
about
of
your
them.
experience, Xochi.
So it definitely didn't work in AOL's case. And actually, my husband and I bought Bebo back 6 months ago for $1 million.
And how much did you sell it to for it? To AOL?
We sold it to AOL in 2008 for $850 million. So
Oh yeah. That's
it was great for us, not good for AOL. And it's a difficult decision when you decide to sell a company as an entrepreneur. I've never been involved in an acquisition. In an acquisition where I bought another company, except Bebo. But it's a very personal decision, and at the time, as an entrepreneur, you have to weigh whether or not you think you can grow the company internally with all the resources you have, or if you should, figure out the best price for your company and sell it. And that's what we did. We've done it twice at Ringo, who we sold to Tickle, and Bebo, who we sold to AOL.
So in terms of, do you see these talent acquisitions working out though? Because I know a lot of people who've got their company bought by Yahoo and were out the door as soon as they could.
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, Xochi, you guys officially won the internet, so congratulations.
You definitely
it's
won.
Amazing. It's
And
amazing.
this situation happened to us at my last company, Inside Network. We got acquired by a company called Web Media Brands, and they thought that they were buying a stable of writers, but that's not how the business works, and we all left. Me, Eric Eldon, and Kim Cutler all went to Techcrunch, and it was not a hard transition.
Yeah, so we talked to buyers. I mean, the number one risk point of a corp dev person, the big thing they worry about in their head is about everybody leaving. Whether it's a talent acquisition or a product acquisition or an asset acquisition, whatever it was, the integration of the business, if it doesn't go well, the corp dev person gets their neck broken. And so, their biggest thought is how can we keep everybody aligned? And, the biggest thing from what we've seen is companies are no longer buying for talent, saying, oh, here's a team of 15 Ruby engineers. Great, we're just going to buy them. That doesn't work. The buyer actually spends a lot of time with the founders to understand what's the product vision of both the acquiring company and the target company. How can those fit together? And how can we really fall in love with each other so that the target company comes in and feels like they all of a sudden have the resources of the large company to be able to continue moving forward. And oftentimes the products are shut down. The target company product is shut down, and the people are kind of left to continue. But success happens most when the people are kept together, and when they're being able to leverage the core expertise that they had just in the context of the new larger company. So I think there's a lot of examples of talent acquisitions that have gone phenomenally well. There's a lot of examples where they have not gone well at all.
How about some of those examples?
Where they've not gone well?
Yeah.
Gosh, I mean, I don't want to call out any specific ones because a lot of these are our customers and users. So, but there's the famous ones where, and I don't know, Dodgeball wasn't really a talent acquisition, but there's a lot of examples where products were shut down. And it's the number one worry about on the founder's mind is what's going to happen, what's next. But I mean, to echo Xochi's point, what I didn't fully appreciate about being in this business of M&A is what a personal, emotional relationship and transaction it really is. Unlike any transaction I've ever seen, fundraising is relatively standard. You have to like the people and get along with the terms. But, second to selling your family home of maybe 30 or 50 years, selling your business is like selling your baby. It's your creation, your time, your money, your relationships, your marriages, your children are all wound up in that company. And you're sitting there across the table from someone whose job it is to extract as much value from you for as little as possible. And so you put those together, and that's oil and water. I mean, it causes an explosive situation immediately. And so part of what we're doing is blogging a lot and trying to increase the visibility in the industry and to help set the expectations of the founders. Guys, this is what's going to happen. It's the person's job across the table to make you feel like you're not worth a lot. And you just need to know that you are. You need to stand your ground. And this is how you do it. And this is what you can expect. But it is a tough conversation, and one that ultimately, in the best situations that work out, the people deeply, deeply, deeply like each other on a personal level and can see a long-term vision together with the companies.
I mean, that really begs the question, do you see founders when they've had their company acquired, are they happy?
I mean, there's a million answers to that. A lot of them are not happy. A lot of them are happy. There's a number of different reasons why founders sell their companies. And I think if you ever consider an M&A process or consider about going into a process, consider what are the objectives that you want to get out from that process. One of those is, hey, I want to have the acquisition badge, the badge that I can put on my chest and put on LinkedIn that says I was acquired. That's one. Two is, hey, I want to be able to look my investors in the eye, you know, so can I return them all their money back? Can I return them half their money back? What is that like? Three, you know, does my product, does my legacy, what happens to my reputation? Four, what happens to my team members? You know, do I want to find them jobs? Like, I actually care more about them than I do care about myself. And then five, you know, I want to make a ton of money, and can I do that through an acquisition? And so really think through what are the objectives you want to accomplish, and really, you know, what's the arsenal you have within your wheelhouse that you can accomplish, and really just drive towards that. Because as long as, you know, very early you can set forward what you want, and the buyer understands that, and you can accomplish that, then I think it's a success. So there's different answers to that.
I mean, I like the Twitter guys' breakdown of how to determine whether to sell your company, which is the price is good enough that it's going to be way more than you'll ever make on your own, that there's an imminent or real threat from a competitor, which could be the acquirer if they choose not to buy you, and that you want to go work for someone who's really great. Like, you believe in the person that you're going to work for. And like, I don't think any of those are like, I want to walk away rich. It's, you know, it's about, is this more than your company will make eventually, and will you be happy working for somebody else? And, you know, some founders, the reason they became founders was because they're not good at working for other people. And so, like, I think that thinking that like, oh, it's getting that, I think people overestimate the importance of that like acquisition badge.
I was chatting with a buddy this weekend, and we were talking about how in Silicon Valley, you know, a lot of people from the outside view in and think, hey, you're doing this to make a ton of money. Everybody just wants to make a ton of money. And yeah, that's nice, but at a certain point it transitions. And like, we're actually all doing this, so this was our thought, we're actually all doing this so that we can prove all the people that said we couldn't do it wrong. Like, at a certain level, it's just like, we are the most spiteful, people that will just keep moving forward in order to be, you know, renowned that we were right, at least what we dedicated our lives to.
Wow,
For a
the
portion
power
of
of nerd angst.
yeah, exactly. That's just me. I don't know.
So there's a frothy market right now in the city. People are raising big rounds, people are having great salaries, and it's had this really, you know, important effect on the culture of San Francisco. People are really worrying we're moving towards a monoculture where rents are rising and things are getting, you know, it's becoming harder and harder to live here if you don't have a high-paying tech salary. You know, are you guys seeing any really great ways that people are, you know, counteracting this gentrification? Because I think that, like, right now I hear a lot of like, oh, the gentrification is really bad, and the tech people are like, no, but that's not like what we want, but nobody's like, here's what we're actually doing to fix it. And I've seen some great companies like Hand Up is doing really great work. You know, I know they're part of Women 2.0, and Mission Bit is a company that helps give public like a computer science and engineering education to local high schools. But, you know, how do you think that we can turn the tide in things, not just, you know, with direct action, but, you know, winning the hearts and minds of the whole world who now really thinks that we're this self-centered city just out to make money?
Yeah, so yeah.
That's a really easy question. How do we fix everything?
Okay, so I have no idea, but I think a great place to start would just be actually engaged in the neighborhood you're in. So I actually think this is a huge problem in tech. It's easy. We can just buy everything online, and I could literally never leave my apartment if I didn't want to, and could become kind of a shut-in coder, which is tempting sometimes. And I've done that. But I think there is value in like knowing the people in your neighborhood. I don't know that you can individually take action. Like, every person can't be an activist about this, but certainly a lot of people are saying, oh, these are these other people, they're not like us. But I'm guessing a lot of the people that that those who feel disenfranchised are interacting with every day do work in tech, and they have no idea. I mean, like, you look like an artist. You don't look like a tech nerd to me, like what you're wearing. I don't think you could say, based on who you walk up to in the street, what people do. Like, if I walk around, I don't actually think I could guess. It's like you could just say tech, 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 and you probably hit a bunch of people. But it seems to me like the bigger thing is just, like, do you actually care about living here? Do you want to live here for the long term? Are you, like, spending money in local restaurants and local shops? And are you, like, talking to your taxi driver? And, like, are you curious about the construction in your neighborhood? And if you don't like it, are you going to your city council meeting? And, like, just be a good citizen. And if you haven't learned to do that yet, it's time to start.
Yeah, I think, you know, being a patron of local businesses, if you're fighting against new housing being built, I don't care how pretty the skyline is. We need more tall buildings in the city. Like, that's a horrible and really self-centered and greedy way to look at it. I know a lot of property owners are thinking about it like, oh, the fewer houses there are, the more my property is worth and the prettier my skyline. And that's just I think we really need to take a hard stance against that perspective. And lastly, like, you know, we're making all this money. there's a lot of great philanthropy efforts around the world, but honestly, I think hyperlocal giving is super important. Look for causes that are in your local area where you can make a difference and see the difference. And I think with that, everyone's going to have a happier time, and we're going to be a more productive industry who can focus on not just, go out there not wanting to change the world, but to make the world a better place. And those two things are really different. So I want to take some questions before we finish up. Does anyone have any questions for our panelists about the frothy market?
Right.
There's big lights, so I can't see very well out there.
Again, I will ask one if no one has one.
Go ahead.
So there's all this money out there, right? And we talk about how easy it is to get. What are the ways that you've seen people be the most successful at raising money? I know we talk a lot about how there's so much out there, but like people running and actually getting it, what are the tactical ways that you've seen be the most successful?
Well, I mean, the first one I would say is most people have no idea how many folks you're going to have to ask. So ask for it over and over and over again. It's probably not 5 conversations you're going to have. It's probably a couple dozen conversations you're going to have. And maybe with unexpected people in your community of folks you know in tech already.
I also think even with angel investors, you have to somehow prove your concept or some type of traction. Even early stage investors want to see some proof.
Yeah, I think, take your concept, keep it very small and focused, and do it well. And do it well repeatedly a number of times in a very small market. And then you can, say that that's proven, and now you go raise money in order to do it on one concentric circle larger. And then do that again, and then one larger circle. And so, I don't know, step by step.
The advice I've heard from a lot of investors, what they like to hear, and what I actually like to hear when I'm hearing about companies and getting pitched to write about a startup is frame your startup in the sense of a problem. What is the problem you're going to fix? Don't tell me about your cool technology or your cool team or how big it's going to be one day. Tell me, this is something that sucks about life, and here's how I fix it. Any more questions out there? I got plenty up here. So I've heard of one issue with M&A is that sometimes companies go through the whole process, especially like small to medium-sized companies. Say a 50 or 100 person company wants to acquire a company that's like 5 people. They go through all of the rigmarole of trying to get to it, and then in the end the deal falls apart. The founders get cold feet. They don't end up wanting to work for something else. And the entrepreneurs tell me it was a huge distraction for them, and that honestly, recruiting is really tough, but that having that much distraction and like getting your hopes up about something and then figuring out how you're going to sort of have a hole in your team that you're going to fill with this other team, and then that not working out is like a huge waste of resources and attention. If you're a company, like how do you decide? If you're a larger company, how do you see people deciding like we really need to acquire?
Yeah,
and you can run through that for product and talent separately if that's helpful.
Yeah, I mean, so it's the why a company's going to acquire. I mean, essentially the reasoning behind it, and what. So typically. We work with a lot of corporate development professionals. The corp dev person is who you've, I'm sure, met around. They're very active. Corp dev people are essentially the air traffic controllers for what goes on within the business on the deal side. Above them is a GM or a CEO who has a strategic vision and goes to them and says, hey, we need to fill these gaps within the business. The corp dev person goes out and finds those companies, and they may reach out to you to have conversations because they're kind of like investors with, where they reach out, they learn about the business, they see if there's a fit in their thesis area, and then potentially move it forward. M&A in general is an incredibly disruptive process. I'd say as a founder, keep the conversations just between you and that corp dev person. Shield your team away from it for as long as possible, because as soon as their minds get on the idea of an acquisition, all of a sudden they're imagining their yachts and their jets. And that's likely not going to happen. In some cases it might, but it's likely not. And so then you have some sort of morale issue if either the value isn't, the exit price isn't high enough, or if the acquisition doesn't happen, you kind of end up in this really tricky situation. So I'd say, as the founder, manage that potentially with your co-founder, but just keep it really limited to the corp dev person. Get your objectives out day number 1 on your first phone call before you even sit down with them. Say, this is what we want to accomplish through an acquisition. Are you okay with that? And the practiced acquirers will also do the same thing to you, because you want to figure out early on, is this going to work or not, so you don't waste time.
I want to add, I think you should talk to your co-founders ahead of time about what you would do if this situation comes up so that it's not a surprise. So, for example, our co-founders, we've discussed, what if someone came to us with an offer? What would we do? And the agreement is, well, we're not worth that much yet, so we won't talk to them because it's probably not going to be a very good deal. And so I think there's a realization you need to have about your own business's value. You could roll the dice and maybe someone will overvalue your company and you'll get lucky. But if you don't think that it's a good deal for them, or you think you're just too small, most startups are binary outcomes. You're either going to be nothing or you're going to be huge. So all that distraction in the middle is just taking away from the potential of the binary outcome being positive. So I would actually, for everyone in this room, just recommend not even considering M&A at all. Sorry. I just wouldn't recommend it.
Well, so the corp dev people, they tell us that they want to meet companies earlier on, and they don't want to have to go through a process.
They'll be cheaper. Yeah, of course
time.
they do. It's a waste of your time. It's good for the corp dev guy. Screw him.
Well, it's like building a relationship. It's like building a relationship with an investor, right? You're not going to fall in love with an investor immediately. And so you want to build a track record of understanding how you work, seeing traction, and move forward. Similar for corp dev, might as well know all the people who could potentially acquire your business if that's something you want to explore, as opposed, doing that in advance as opposed to kind of running a quick process. I don't know if you have Xochi, if you have a different thought on this stuff, but having gone through it.
Yeah, having gone through it. Well, I think it was a bit easier for me because my co-founder was my husband and we were very much on the same page. I was always open to talk to everybody and anybody just because you never know what's going to happen. So it's not like we expected for everyone we talked to in the corp dev department would make us an offer. But if we weren't open to talk to those people, we would not have sold to AOL when we did.
Yeah, I think, though in the end, I think right now it's a really good market in mobile for if founders are building a business and you're wondering, how am I going to make money off this business? You got to remember, all the big companies are looking towards a very standalone app strategy, which makes it a lot easier to integrate whole other companies. And so I think that right now we're going to see more of these mobile product acquisitions the way that sort of the Instagram deal went down, where it's companies say, we don't do this well, we're going to buy into this because we know that nobody wants a single app crammed with all these features. They want a bunch of different sort of piecemeal experiences, and I think that that's going to play really well to the M&A scene. So just a recap on about what's going on. We're seeing an explosion of seed stage money right now, but so there's a bottleneck at the Series A where people are really having to focus and show that they have had they've gained traction in some specific way. Big companies are raising huge rounds in the later stage because there's a feeling that money is cheap and now the getting is good right now. M&As are way up, and we think that that's a great way for companies to avoid stagnating and can stay feeling young and sort of counteract the brain drain that happens as people leave big companies to want to go be founders again. And that with all this money pouring into San Francisco, it's really important for us to think about how can we support our local community, shopping local, investing in local local infrastructure, and helping with local charities. But overall, I think the big message is that it's not a bubble. The market's just frothy.
Yoo-hoo!
Thank you guys so much for coming out today. Thank you all.
Awesome.